In this presidential election, every vote, especially in the swing states, will count. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are making repeated visits to these areas, trying to appeal to anyone in every demographic. There is one group that makes up about 8% of the population that could help favor one candidate over the other. They are called news avoiders. According to, they're not you, by the way, according to the University of Minnesota's Benjamin Toff, they are a group of Americans who assiduously avoid the news.
Toff says this demographic has common traits. They are distrustful and view journalists and politicians as the same, untrustworthy. They are mostly young and low income, and many are women. News avoiders span racial and ethnic groups. What may be most surprising is this group tends to also avoid social media. So, how should these candidates vie for these voters? I am also distrustful of journalists and politicians, so I guess I vibe quite a bit with the news avoider group.
In a sense, but, you know, and you're also, so I think there was a key factor here that maybe folks really aren't getting, because it's hard to avoid the news. It's hard to understand who, at this point, not understand who any of these candidates are. If you don't know enough about Donald Trump, where have you been? Well, literally, where are you hiding? I want to go on that magical vacation. I mean, I went to the Caucasus countries recently, and I'm in the car in the middle of the mountains, and the driver is talking about the presidential election. I'm like, if this guy, where are these undecided voters? If this guy in the middle of the Caucasus Mountains in Europe, it blows my mind. So I think a key factor to take away here is they're busy people. There are folks who are overworked, juggling household duties, usually women, so working women who might have 1, 2, maybe even 3 jobs, and children, and at the end of the day, they're tired, and maybe they turn on Netflix and watch Love is Blind, maybe they don't watch anything, maybe they just tune out. I get it. I totally feel them, and I understand them, but they're still gonna vote. And that's what's so interesting to me is the overworked person who's not consuming all this media, or any media really, also feels that they should vote. And they do lean a little bit more conservative, and I think that's why the burden is more on Kamala Harris right now to win over these voters, because you know, they're female, and she is definitely doing better with women, and she wants to win over the Never Trump female supporters. And I think that's a really good point, is it's the Never Trump female supporters.
Yeah, and I think that's a very different demographic from what we're labeling here as the news avoiders, because Never Trump women tend to be upper middle class, live mostly in wealthy areas, they tend to be white, whereas these news avoiders, it says, cut across racial and gender demographics, that they, again, tend to be lower income. And as you said, like, these people are justified in not wanting to be super plugged into the news or not having the time to do so. I would never fault them for that. And I also don't fault them for still wanting to exercise their right to vote, right? Because I think it's pretty simple for a lot of people right now. The economy is the number one issue for a reason. Mm-hmm. Their prices have gone up on average 25% over the past 4 years. If you are someone who is working multiple jobs and you're part of a working class family, what you know is what you feel in your pocketbook, mm-hmm. which is that things are more expensive, the housing supply is down. The jobs report, even though they have shown that at least this past month they exceeded expectations at about 250,000, previous months the jobs have been revised down. We've also seen that the trends are that most of the job increases are going to foreign-born workers, about 1 million over the past year, compared to a decrease in 1 million jobs for native-born Americans. So if you're one of these news avoiders who's in one of these families that is struggling to get by, and all you're feeling constantly is economic pinch, and you don't feel like there's a whole lot of opportunity out there for you, what you do know is that 4 or 5 years ago, things felt better. Things felt hopeful. Things felt optimistic.
Did they? I don't know if they've ever felt better. I think, and there's no truth, there's really no evidence of that. 4 or 5 years ago, we were in the middle of a pandemic. People were at home a lot of folks didn't have jobs. A lot of folks were frontline workers who were forced to work in the middle of a crisis.
I'm obviously referring to the pre-COVID Trump economy.
Which wasn't great. The economy is much better than that.
How was it? Oh my gosh.
But
I feel like we're living in revisionist history.
We're not. I mean, the jobs report, listen, the jobs report was great, okay? But one factor here that I agree with you on is that people are overworked. These jobs reports, each time they come out, they're reflective of not full-time jobs. You know, we have a full-time job problem in this country. There are a lot of folks who are working multiple jobs. Probably these news avoiders are working multiple jobs. They're low income. Some of them are probably gig workers. They're being taxed more than the wealthiest in America. They're feeling, no matter who the president is, if the economy is not supporting low-income workers and middle-class workers, we're going to have this issue. If we're not subsidizing social services so that, how many folks don't qualify for health care because they make just a little bit over, Obamacare, because they make just a little bit over what that rate is. And they live in a state like Georgia, or Georgia's actually gotten better on this, but Florida, for instance, where they're stuck paying thousands of dollars in health care because they make just a little bit more than what you are supposed to make to qualify for Obamacare. And if you have kids, I actually know somebody personally who pays for their child's health care because they don't qualify for Obamacare in Florida, but they don't pay for their own health care. And they're moving to another state, New York, because of that. Because that's how much it's impacting their families. And student loans, of course, play into that as well, if they're educated, of course. So this is a real issue, and it's going to be very difficult for both candidates to reach them when, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which side. These are the folks who are saying it doesn't matter which side. I'm independent for a reason. I'm a swing voter for a reason. Both sides are the same. We just talked about this in another segment, that the majority of Democrats and Republicans in power are still beholden to financial interests. And we've done enough for the meta economy, but we have not done enough for working people and low-income folks. And reducing their costs across the board and having social safety nets that really support them when you're working 3 jobs.
Yeah, and I think that's fundamentally the problem when people say the economy's never been better, because it's never been better for who? Yes, the GDP is up. Yes, jobs have increased, but again, that's mostly to foreign-born workers, not native-born Americans. I mean, I just don't see that things have gotten better for people basically under the top 1 to maybe 10%, right? Mm-hmm. And even then, if you're someone who does have a good job, maybe you're upper middle class, that doesn't mean that your groceries going up to $400 a month for your family instead of $150 doesn't affect you.
Right.
I mean, that impacts everybody. That cuts across class lines. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's more severe for people who are at the lower end of the income spectrum. But those prices are never going back down, right?
Right. Even though inflation has been reduced, the numbers don't get reduced.
Right, because the rate has decreased, and it's at, 2.5 now? Yeah. But it's still above where it was when Biden took office, and the rate only fell within the past 6 months to a year. And over that time period, again, we've seen a 25% increase in prices that are never going to be reversed.
Tariffs ain't going to help that, every economist in this country says. So.
Well, it depends on if you factor in the potential in wage increases for American workers and the reshoring of manufacturing, right? There's a trade-off involved in tariffs, and it also depends on your values. Do you want to make sure that people have access to cheap goods from China, or do you think it's more important to build up a manufacturing base of unskilled workers for people who don't want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to go into college debt? And I think that's a reasonable conversation to have.
And I completely agree with you, and I think that's the trade-off, isn't right. Increase tariffs and then don't build it up. The problem with Donald Trump is he had an opportunity to do that and he didn't do it, and that's why the majority of unions in this country are pushing back against him on these tariff deals, because unfortunately, some of these factories are never going to come back. Yes, it's going to take a long time to rebuild that workforce. And technology has changed. So, the fact that the Koch brothers and the right wing have been trying to dismantle
don't lump those together.
have been trying to dismantle unions for years actually hurts the American dream. And Donald Trump himself, of course, outsourced his jobs for his ties and all of his, products to China. That's the comedy of the whole.
Unfortunately, well, I think that would suggest that he knows better than anybody what cost incentives do to a business and why you have to potentially punish businesses who think that it's the right idea to manufacture elsewhere, right? You have to have, most businesses are not going to put the principle of American jobs over cutting costs, because that would be profit suicide. So government policy steps in that case to change the incentive structure for a company. I know we could stay on this all day, but of course we have tons more to cover. We're going to be back with more Rising after this.